This is Ryan with GameRoomSolutions.com, and in this kind of wiring 101 video, I'm going to show you the difference between button layouts, encoders, how to wire them up, 4-way to 8-way joysticks, and so forth, so stay tuned. Alright, so to get through this, I went ahead and just did a school time PowerPoint because I think it'll illustrate exactly what I want to talk about here, the different control layouts that are out there, how to do some of the wiring, what's the difference between a USB encoder and a keyboard encoder, also what's a 4-way versus an 8-way, because that comes up a lot. We get that question a lot, so let's get started here. So there's different button layouts. For instance, you would have a 6 button, so you can see there in the gray your YXL, BAR would be your buttons there. That would be really good for things like Street Fighter, Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Genesis. Pretty much everything is in good shape with the 6-button layout. But there are a couple other ones that we should talk about. So a lot of people are like, well, why is there a 7th button there, that bottom left button? What is that for? Well, that would be for like Neo Geo, so you could use the 4 bottom buttons. You still have your 6 buttons up top how you want, but you could do your bottom 4 just like a Neo Geo, or also like a run button on Mortal Kombat. So why would I want an 8 button? So you still have your 6 buttons there, but this is great not only for Neo Geo, because you can see across the bottom, has a lot of different setups, but also for something like PS2. So if you're running like a Windows system with newer systems on it, like PS2, it's funny to say newer and PS2, but you guys know what I mean. Where you would have a couple shoulder buttons, 2 right shoulder buttons, 2 left shoulder buttons. That's why you would have this additional 8 buttons. So those are the different setups in most cases, and these are some of the different reasons why you would maybe want to do one versus the other. Okay, so this would be like on our 4-player layouts that we have there, just to talk through it. So you'd have your player 1, you can see the coin in the start that would correlate back to that. Also your 4-way, that's also player 1, which we'll talk more about in a minute. Your player 2, your player 3, your player 4, so that way you can get your NFL Blitz or Ninja Turtles or Simpsons or whatever 4-player you want to play. You can get some miscellaneous admin buttons. Those are nice, so that way everyone knows this button's exit, this button's to enter a game, that kind of stuff, instead of using maybe like B and A on your player buttons. Admin buttons I like because it just makes it really simple for people that's not used to playing your unit. Oh, I push this to exit. I push this to enter a game. You could add a spinner, so that'd be for like games like Arkanoid, Pong, things like that. You could add a trackball. I get the question a lot, where do you wire those? Typically with a spinner and a trackball, those will be USB, and you'll just USB those directly into your computer. They don't necessarily need to wire into like an encoder of some kind. Okay, so let's talk about the different connections. So you have an arcade button, right? That arcade button could be interpreted into your computer as a gamepad button or as a keyboard stroke. The difference is based on the encoder that you have. So if you have something like a Zenmo, or one of these little Easy Get, something like that, that would be a gamepad controller. So your system would see it like that Super Nintendo controller up there. It would come across as a gamepad. Where if you have something like an iPack, if you wire into the iPack, it's a keyboard encoder. So essentially it's going to take whenever you push that button, and it's going to convert it into an actual key, like an R key or an A key or a C key or a Shift key or whatever that is. So that's the difference there. You can configure both easily within software for MAME or whatever emulators you're going to play. There's not much difference. The other thing I'm going to say is, the question we get all the time is, are these 0 delay? That's just a marketing term. As far as I know, everything that's out now is quote-unquote 0 delay. There's not anything. It's just like an old school kind of boogeyman term. But you don't have to worry about it. With any of this stuff, if you press a button, the guy's going to punch whenever you press the button. There's no issues there. Okay, so let's talk about just the basic connections here. So this is your standard arcade button here. You got a couple connectors. One of them on the bottom, that would be your ground. So that would go to the next button. There's a ground harness that we'll talk about in a second that'll just go from button to button to button, and then finally the one end would go to the ground on your encoder. The next one is like your action button. So this is the button that would go directly to your encoder. So if this is player 1 button A, or button 4, whatever this is, that's where it would plug directly into the encoder for each button, and then again the ground would go across the bottom. So a ground harness would look something like this. to where just go button to button. Then you can see that one end, that's the end that would go to your encoder, so everything's grounded. The other would go directly from the button. Each one would go to the encoder, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. And then finally with the joystick, a lot of them will have like a connector on the end. You'll connect that into the joystick. Your black will be ground. And then you'll just test which one. You can open Windows Control Panel and go to wherever your device is, and then open up your device in there. Then you can do some testing to say, okay, which one's up, which one's down, which one's left, which one's right. It's not always the same, and the reason why is because you can orientate the joystick. You know, it could go up and down, left and right, like the actual plate there, not the joystick itself, but the actual plate. So that changes depending on how you have that plate orientated when you install it in your unit. But it's pretty quick trial and error to figure out which direction's which once you do it for player one. As long as your plates are orientated the same way, it would work across all the other players. Okay, so we're going to talk about wiring up about the most complex wiring that you could do, which would be like a big 4-player unit into an iPack. So just to talk through this, we would start with the player one, and you can see on the iPack at the top, you have each one of those little screws are labeled. So essentially you'd run a wire from your button into the corresponding, whatever is labeled up there on the iPack. So if I wanted to start player one, I would do the left up into the one left. And you would just screw down the wire. It would be bare wire going into the iPack, and you would just screw that little screw down to hold it into place. The other side would be hooked up to the micro switch. So you can see there's my one up, my right, my down. It says there one switch one, which would equal left control, which is a standard in MAME. It would be looking for the left control for that button. But you can see there, one switch one. That's how it would be. That's why we have this laid out, this diagram for our 4 players laid out like this so guys understand what it is. So 2, 3, 4. So you can see 1, 2, 3, 4 goes down below because we're doing the 6-button layout first, 5, 6. And then depending on if you do the 7 button, you would wire the 7 button there. But if you have an 8-button layout, the 7th button would be there, and then your 8th button. And then at the top, it's kind of hard to see here, but the coin and start, so you'd have your coin and your start. And then, of course, where I just highlighted there, that's your USB that would go into your computer. So let's talk a little bit about the 4-way. So you can see here I would have two player ones essentially set up. So the reason why, here's what a 4-way is. So if I press up and to the right on a joystick and I'm playing Street Fighter, he's going to jump up and jump to the right, which is awesome. That's exactly what I want him to do. If I press over in Pac-Man, right, if I'm going to the right in Pac-Man or Miss Pac-Man and I want to go up, I can go up. And Pac-Man will go up on a 4-way. The problem is if it's set to 8-way, I would, as I'm going right, I would bring the joystick to up, and obviously in between them, I'd go up and right at the same time. If I do that, Pac-Man wigs out and doesn't know what to do because those old school controls are just up, down, left, right. There are no diagonals. So if I hit up and to the right, Pac-Man won't know what to do. It'll probably just keep going to the right, and you'll die. That's why you want to physically set up the joystick to only go up, down, left, and right, or have that set up, and that's how we have it. That's why you would have an additional 4-way joystick, is so that way either one of them is player one. So if I'm playing Street Fighter, I just do my normal controls with the 8 buttons. If I play something like Dig Dug or an older game, I would just physically grab the 4-way controls and just play those, so that way I don't run into this issue. And it's pretty easy to set the joysticks over from 8-way to 4-way, but on a bigger unit, it's best just to have, in my opinion, just go ahead and have your 8-way you can play there, and then your little 4-way setup. So to wire a 4-way, you would basically just wire everything into the same player one. So you would have your 8-way joystick and all those buttons wired in, and then you would wire your 4-way into the same ones for everything we talked about. The only difference in these controls is the fact that the gate on the bottom would be set up as 4-way on the little 4-way one. So that way, again, you could just go up, down, left, right. You could not go diagonal. Physically, you couldn't go diagonal because of the way the plate's set up, to where you could go the full 8 ways around on the other unit. So that's it, just kind of a high-level overview of the different button layouts and wiring and so forth. Make sure and like the video and visit GameRoomSolutions.com.